So welcome. Thank you everybody for joining for the second C-Lab Pulse. We're doing these monthly, same time, same day. We'll do it again and feature some more folks next month. So feel free to jump back in if you found it valuable. The goal of this really is to provide community updates, provide a forum for folks to have conversations, share resources all around sort of the future of education and work. And it's funny, we just sort of came on the tail end of other webinars today that were hosted in Colorado that were around the same topic. So there's a lot of content right now and a lot of thinking, big thinking going on across a number of different platforms and venues to just think about the future of education and work. So there's no shortage of options for folks, it seems, at the moment. Both based on the reality of the pandemic, but also some of the technology affordances. So there's some silver lining, I think. So the goal with C-Lab, for those, I think most names and faces I'm seeing are fairly familiar, but our goal is really to align the state of Colorado around ecosystem development and collaboration and innovation and experimentation just around this sort of future of education and employment. We partnered up with Spencer and Angie and others at the Department of Higher Ed, Michael as well. And they've been helping just sort of co-lead this effort to learn and to convene things like this. And now we're really looking towards sort of a second phase of how do we make this real? We've learned a lot. There's been a lot of research that Learning Economy has done, that local partners have done in Colorado, that obviously national, great to have Sharon here. There's obviously a lot of great research going on nationally, but we feel like we're sort of, pandemic aside, that obviously has created a new reality and a new lens and a new warping of time, it feels like, over the top of a lot of this work. But from our perspective, we're sort of entering another phase where we can really start to think about pilots and models, and when it comes to sort of some of the innovation going on, trying to really put the rubber to the road and learn a lot and actually take some action. So with that in mind, I wanted to just provide a quick high level on this stakeholder action guide, which we released recently. And I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to share my screen real quick just to sort of hit on some high level stuff. And then I want to turn it over. I want to keep this pretty brief, but just for folks who haven't taken a peek at this, just to give you a sense. So again, we'll distribute this, and I think Colin or others can share this in the chat too. We have a link out to this document, but it provides some high level framing around sort of what the next steps are for C-Lab and some of the aligned projects in Colorado. So I'm going to jump down with the sort of high level of objectives being, again, to align and unify sort of a broader ecosystem of stakeholders in Colorado, to think about some core governing principles. What are the things that really are driving this work forward? Support and advance a lot of standards and other sort of underlying foundational elements that sort of live underneath a lot of this work. And then again, we're sort of entering into this phase of what does it look like to really start to scale some pilots and understand how this work affects institutions, educators, students, again, across an entire sort of decentralized ecosystem across the state. And then just sort of seed and support education, advocacy, equity, keeping those that are at the end of this work in mind, and what are the needs that are sort of really important to keep in mind. Obviously, students being sort of at the center of a lot of this work. So I'll stop here, but this is our hope, and we have some interesting work already underway across a number of institutions around really piloting this idea of sort of a portable wallet and sort of a student passport. An idea that I think has been circulating a lot of conversations, and there's obviously other great pilots and work being done around this idea. But our hope is really through 2020 to start to think about how these pilots can get stood up, what the right sort of service partners and stakeholders are to be involved, and what sort of models we can actually prove out, and what can we learn from this sort of an idea where a student has ownership over their degrees initially, but also just more granular credentials, which is also, I'm really happy to have Scott and folks from Credential Engine involved. Obviously, they've been doing a ton of work in Colorado. They'll share more about that. So won't go into the details beyond that, but know that stakeholder action guide is available, and feel free to reach out if any questions come up, if and when you have a chance to review it. So that's sort of high level on this call, as well as C-Lab sort of goals coming up this year. And with that, I want to give Colin a quick minute or two to both introduce himself and share some of sort of the support he's been providing. He just came on recently to help out as we try to sort of build a broader capacity to help support some of this work. So Colin, if you want to give a quick intro and let folks know kind of how you're helping.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Some of you I have chatted with and am becoming more familiar with. So excited to be a part of all the work that C-Lab's doing and the Learning Economy Initiative. So a little background on me. I am a pre-K-12 educator, now going on year 15, all the way, working with 3-year-olds up through administrators and district level and state level officials. So I got involved with Learning Economy kind of in a sort of backwards way of doing innovation programs and systems development for independent and public schools. And it overlaps pretty nicely with the work and the mission of Learning Economy. And so the more I learned, the more I realized that the things that I'm trying to do to support schools and networks was exactly in alignment with the Learning Economy. So Taylor and I have been talking about sort of next steps with C-Lab specific projects, and some of you may have already gotten some emails from me. I've had a meeting or two with some of you as well, and so on the tail of the action guide, I'm sending out invites to schedule 30-minute meetings so that Taylor and I can get a better sense of where some pilot projects are and where some opportunities are to connect and support the work that is happening. So a couple of those pilot programs that we are getting involved with in the fall we can share more about those in the meetings, but we really want to get a sense of where our stakeholders are at and what we can do to help kind of connect some dots and help support the work that you're doing and really kind of make this actionable. I think that's the spirit of the action guide, and that sort of the charge of that I was given when I came on board was it's time to hit go, and there's a lot of great ideas and things floating around, but we're really here to put some structure and some organization around it. So if you see an email from me, that is probably an invite to schedule some time. It is not a bot sending you a generic email. It is actually coming from my hands and my computer. So if you see that come through, click the link and find some time to chat. Really, it's been really inspiring to hear where everybody's at and try to really put some structure around how we can make this real and impact the institutions all across Colorado. So I'll send it back to Taylor, but yeah, looking forward to talking more with everybody and helping you bring this to life.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks Colin. And there's also those that know I've been obviously deep in the sort of post-secondary world in Colorado most of my life. And so it's good to have his perspective and lens sort of back into the into the reality that is K-12. So I think that's also really useful. And so, yeah, thanks, Colin. So that's it up front. I want to open the floor briefly if anyone has just thoughts or questions around sort of high level framing, where we're at as a sort of collection and collaborative with C-Lab, and then any high level framing, and then we'll jump into sort of the meat of the programming. But wanted to leave a quick moment here if anyone has thoughts or questions. I will give the awkward pause of silence 2 seconds. Often it's just a where is the mute button? So I want to make sure I give time. Okay, cool, good. That's exciting because moved right on to the next piece here. So I'm going to just turn it over to Spencer and Michael, and they can either hand the baton to Scott for an intro, but take it away. We're going to get some just sort of community updates and talk about some of the evolving work going on, both between the Department of Higher Ed and as well as Credential Engine.
Sure. And I'm just going to speak quite briefly from the department's perspective and then kick it over to Michael for an introduction. Michael, if that works for you. And we obviously are knee deep in all of the same things that everybody is kind of swimming through these days. And that's a lot of budget conversations from the state's perspectives. And we're also thinking through, opportunities that exist among the response to the pandemic. So that's actually something that I'm really excited about, is having conversations with this disruption to everything that we're experiencing, having conversations with partners, with students, with faculty members to get their thoughts and their perspectives on the opportunities that exist for us kind of moving forward. And I say us, meaning higher ed here in Colorado, which is really kind of the scope of the work that we're focusing on. But we're also open to further collaborations. And one of those collaborations that I wanted to queue up for Michael to introduce is the work that he's doing. And so I'll just turn it over to Michael now. And Michael, you're up.
That's great. No, thanks so much, Spencer. And thank you all. This is always a great group to come and talk to and to talk about all the exciting things that we're doing at CDHE with all of our different partners. So you've heard me and Spencer and probably others talk about a lot of the work that we're doing in terms of COVID-19 response. A lot of that has been focused on Onward CO. Some of you might be familiar with the Onward US kind of brand and the work that's going on there, really being able to connect individuals in that most rapid response way to various resources that are available. Also kind of the more longer term, more robust experience of My Colorado Journey, which you've heard us talk about as well, being able to really provide education, training, and workforce planning to students of any age, and making sure that individuals have as much information as they can when they're making these very important decisions, and especially given the circumstances and the environments in which we're all dealing with right now. So one of the elements of that is really being able to tell the story and be able to show the whole ecosystem of training and education opportunities within Colorado. And so we have our eligible training provider list in Colorado, and being able to really leverage that as best we can, whether it's on Onward CO, whether it's on MCJ, and also with our partners at Credential Engines. Credential Engine has a registry where they have all of the different types of training and education opportunities that are available, and being able to apply that taxonomy to the list that we have in the hopes of streamlining and really elevating the visibility of a lot of these different programs. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott. He can talk a lot more about the specific work of Credential Engine, and happy to talk more about the Colorado specific context too.
Great, thank you. So I'll talk a little bit about the work we're doing in general, but I really want to focus it on Colorado and some of the opportunities that I think can continue to be fleshed out there. Let me start by saying, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was told by Emily on our staff that you all are moving ahead with the intention of having the entire ETPL published into the schema and making it linked open data that is machine actionable by the end of this quarter.
That is the goal. End of Q2 is what we have on our plans, and we're doing all that we can to kind of meet that deliverable.
That is awesome news, and I think really valuable, as you say, for helping to meet the response to this economic crisis, because getting all of that information in and having it available to unemployed workers, but also students who are just now emerging into the workforce and employers is really critical. And to that end, I'm also going to, on this call and in many other calls and conversations I've been in around Colorado, plug your efforts to have that ETPL be as broad and inclusive as absolutely legally, physically, technologically, emotionally possible in the state, so that it's not just, those programs that are eligible for federal funding of any types, but it's really everything in the state, from the boot camps to the massage parlors to the private colleges to the licenses to everything, because that's really going to make the tools that you can build that much richer and that much more valuable to the students and the people that are using Onward or other platforms. So kudos for that. A couple of other just quick things that people on the call may know about but may not. You know, the work around interoperable learning records is getting a lot of good momentum, especially at the federal level. There was a meeting yesterday of the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board that really advanced the federal government's commitment to this work. And associated with that, there have been some grants recently that have come out, both with the Reimagining K-12 grants and soon Reimagining Workforce grants, that include in there, in the language, strong encouragement for recipients of the grants to publish data about their credentials and skills and competencies in open schema and linked data formats so they can be used in ILRs, which is phenomenal because it just means that both the federal government and state governments and, you know, private vendors are all kind of using the same messaging of we need this data to be open and public. I think you're going to see more of that happening across the federal government. More grants, more funding that's made available is going to include that kind of language. So you really are seeing a tremendous movement in this direction, which we're very encouraged about. If you're looking for other ways to promote this work, in the bill that was sponsored by Bobby Scott, the chair of the House Education and Labor Committee in the Congress, he included $90 million in that in that bill to go to states to support state work in making data transparent. Knowing, of course, that states are strapped right now, he was trying to find ways to get more money into states' hands for this purpose, knowing also that it's a real benefit to the recovery effort. So it did not make it into the House version of the HEROES Act, which is, you know, their attempt to get a next bill. There's conversation in the Senate about wanting to put it in, but, you know, any more voices to your senators would be very helpful in trying to make that happen. And then the last thing I'll say is, you know, there are some really good parallel efforts taking place now in other states that you may want to look at as you're thinking about pilot ideas and activities. And I would point to New Jersey, that is building a decision-making tool based on the data that's in our schema and in their ETPL that's geared for unemployed workers. And then in Indiana, where they're going to begin to require that the data about credentials and competencies in the registry be embedded in the digital credentials that are being issued by Parchment to both all high school graduates and Ivy Tech community college graduates, and they're working now to expand that to all public institutions of higher ed. So there are other examples around the country that can be looked at as models, and we're thrilled to be working with you all on this. And I'll stop there.
And real quick, either Scott or Michael, can you go ahead and give a quick high level on just ETPL and any sort of acronyms? I know that we all live in this world of acronyms, but just because of the breadth of those potentially on the call, could you go ahead and give a quick high level on that?
To Michael, since it's you know, Colorado's version's a little different, but go ahead, Michael.
Sure, no, I will do my best. So ETPL, eligible training provider list, as Scott alluded to, these are programs that are WIOA eligible. So being able to draw down those WIOA dollars for participants in these programs to be able to support them engaging in that way. I will say, as Scott said, what we're hoping is that that list can be as expansive as is allowable, and being able to collect the breadth of programs and providers that are out there. You know, there might be certain programs within the public institutions of higher education that are WIOA eligible, and they would hopefully be on that list, and we want to kind of drive more people to do that. There might be some that are not, and again, being able to drive them so that the ETPL can as much as it can be the canonical source for a lot of this work that we're trying to do, whether it's with Credential Engine. I know Google Pathways has talked about similar work. So being able to have the ETPL be that place. I'll also say, I know our Division of Private Occupational Schools at CDHE is also very involved in a lot of these conversations. So trying to get more of their private occupational schools to be on the ETPL. That could be to get them WIOA funding, but also to be able just to capture what's going on in terms of individuals or programs and providers who are on that list, and again, being able to put that whole ecosystem of all the different opportunities out there.
And I would just add, I wouldn't get hung up at all about the name of that list, right? There is a federal obligation that comes with getting federal dollars to know which programs and providers are eligible. But really what you want is that single canonical source of data about all credentials and competencies in the state, whether they're eligible or seeking to be eligible for a federal dollar or not. There is a kind of this obligation of the state to making sure that its residents have the necessary information about any program offered in that state and legally allowable in that state. So regardless of what the list is called, in Washington State, they use the term career bridge as the large collective term for all of their data about programs and providers. And a part of the program, a portion, about half of the programs in career bridge are WIOA eligible or are ETPL eligible, but they live within the same data set. And so just having all of that in one place is the really, really important goal.
And I'll also add on to there, and Spencer knows this well, and I'm sure a lot of you know it well. It's sometimes a delicate dance that we do with our institutions and our education providers in terms of what we require and what we CDHE have the authority to require different programs and providers to do. So currently, there is not a requirement that all providers and programs be on the ETPL. However, again, working collaboratively with everyone in this space in Colorado, trying to get as many people to see the benefits, not only for us, and to the field, but to the institutions and the providers themselves. Because if we're able to create this list that is very expansive, showing all the different types of opportunities that are available, in a lot of ways it helps with marketing for these institutions and providers. Because if we're pushing information to Credential Engine, pushing it to MCJ, pushing it to Google, pushing it to anyone, and having it all be living there, it raises the visibility of all these programs, especially after going through some kind of needs assessment or interest assessment, being able to point individuals to all these opportunities, especially if they're in their specific geography. And so again, it's the dance, and we do the best that we can, and making the case for why it is important and beneficial to us all for different programs and providers to be on that list.
That's awesome. So yeah, we're about 5 minutes ahead of schedule as far as this segment goes. And I know Spencer, Michael, you've got other things going, and obviously I'd love it if you could hang, but you can certainly jump if needed. Scott, same goes. But I wanted to open it up a bit, maybe 5 minutes if folks have thoughts or questions, or certainly you can do that by way of the chat, but feel free to also just unmute and want this to be as conversational as possible. So any thoughts from the broader audience here?
So I have a question regarding kind of the thoughts around the Rethink K-12 education.
And sorry, real quick on just, hey, here's who I am, and
oh, sorry,
high level intro. No worries. But
I'm sorry. Marty Reed. I'm with Randa Solutions. We provide statewide platforms for teacher effectiveness, and are currently working on a teacher wallet for portability of those credentials and evidence of work. So just curious, who has thought about kind of the Rethink K-12 education grants and how that would kind of map into this work, or how this work would map into it, vice versa? Love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I can chime in to start. I think both of those opportunities, the Rethinking K-12 and the Reimagining Work, I hope I'm getting those names right, are things that have been on our radar. I do know that with the K-12 one, at least for the Colorado context, that would be something that CDE would have to apply for, since they are the K-12 authority. And so we've been in conversations with them about what that might look like, kind of talking about this work, talking about the MCJ work more broadly, talking, of course, about needs and ideas that they might have. So being able to kind of throw things like that out there, and to be able to see if that's something that they might apply for.
Has Colleen been part of those conversations, or?
Colleen O'Neill?
Yes.
I think some of them, yes. I know that we've also been talking with Carolyn Haug, who works in educator effectiveness and at the ed prep space, and thinking about all the different kind of buckets of what it might be. But again, I bet that is something that really, at least the decision on applying and being able to be eligible for that is something that would live, from my reading, with CDE.
We should connect on that.
That'd be great.
We're building a license platform, so sorry, Sharon, go ahead.
No, I was can I chime in on this, because I was actually going to maybe mention it a little bit. So I'm going to say, I think two and a half things about this. So I think it's great that this is a conversation, and I think Scott alluded to the fact that there is sort of an opportunity to talk both about interoperability as well as this idea of digital credentialing within the framework for both the K-12 and the workforce grant. So I put in the chat the link to the specific NIA for the grant, and I think yesterday was the deadline if your state wanted it. So these are grants that will be for state education agencies. There's $300 million total on the table. And for those $300 million, you have three options. And each state can only pick one of the three options. The first option is called the micro grant option. It's essentially like, can we throw fistfuls of cash at local education entities, districts, schools to buy stuff that they might need for learning, like broadband access, licenses, devices, etc. So that's option one. Option two is the option that, and I'm going to just go ahead and read it to you. It starts on page 10. It's called Statewide Virtual Learning and Course Access Programs. And essentially, like, there is a loose definition of virtual learning or course access program, but you can either design content, you can create platforms, or like virtual schools, I guess, essentially schools in air quotes, or some subset of like a course or program. Or you can sort of expand on one if you already have one, like thinking about like Georgia virtual schools, for example, or Florida virtual schools, they already exist, and how would you expand it? Yeah, these are stabilization funds, and so the idea here is that knowing that moving into the fall and into the future, there's going to be some hybrid of in-person and online learning, what is missing from how you are currently delivering content or delivering your educational sort of experience to students that you could supplement with some grant funding. It's under this priority 2, where we make a very strong recommendation that if you are doing this, that you use open standards that are described in our White House interoperability paper, which that paper is pretty much an extensive, like a pretty exhaustive list of all of them. And you know, we explain a little bit why we do this, especially you can imagine if you are building or expanding a virtual school, or if you're creating content. There is a lot of opportunity as you're designing courses and programs to think about what credential or what sort of certification at the end of it a student is going to get to like signify that they've completed either a course or a program. And for those states who are interested in thinking about like continuity of learning between K-12 and higher ed, you can imagine a lot of opportunity there for bridging or like assisting students to move from one to the other, articulating their records, etc. So that's essentially the that is in a nutshell the grant. The third option obviously is any innovative, and I'll use the air quotes again, sort of model that you would like to propose as a state that serves your needs. So the money is pretty flexible. You can do quite a lot with it. I think the first or second week of June, we have a webinar scheduled to talk about option 2, which is the virtual schools or course access programs and the interoperability requirements there. So once that's scheduled and there's a registration link, I'll definitely send it out to Taylor and crew, and he'll make sure that everyone on this call gets it.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you, Sharon. No one else on this call could have provided quite the depth of options. So I'm so glad you were here, given that came up. So this is perfect. And Sharon, you're on deck, so we'll hear more. We'll change course a little bit here, but big thank you to Scott and Michael and obviously others that are involved in this work around you know, again, it is a delicate balance of sort of unifying data in a way that is valuable and useful, but doesn't overstep and you know, become sort of counterproductive to what I think we all think is possible and really know is possible if we can unify data in a responsible way. So certainly with where learning economy is headed and some of this work, I think, you know, it can only happen if we understand data in a more sort of both granular but means of pulling data together with integrity that we actually I'm trying to find the right bridge into the next conversation, but yeah, so thank you guys for the work, and certainly stick around if you want to jump into the next conversation. You are more than welcome to. So I think I'll probably just turn it over. I know Spencer is going to stick around and help just sort of moderate this next piece, but wanted to just say thanks. And yeah, as we think about, you know, our work and some of these potential pilots, Credential Engine and that registry sits at the center of what might be possible in a big way. So so yeah, thank you for all the work. I'm going to turn it over to Spencer. We're going to chat a bit about some of the work that has been going on across the country around distributed ledgers and blockchains, and want to sort of have a conversation around where that, you know, whether or not there's applicability in that technology. I certainly think there is, but again, we've got a long way to go to sort of rethink some of these infrastructures. I also will say, I think we all know that like the next year or two, there's just going to be opportunity, whether it's some of the money coming through federally or just a sort of, you know, existential understanding that the structures that we've relied on may be a little more fragile than we realize. So yeah, I think you know, the next few years there's a lot of opportunity to really re-envision at a base infrastructure level what does education really look like moving into the next few years. So that's probably it for me for the rest of the call. So I'm going to turn it over to Spencer.
Thanks, Taylor. And I'll just jump right in. You know, another function of these calls that we really value from the C-Lab community that we've established here in Colorado, and kind of this network that's being built with the learning economy, which is great, is this lifelong learning. And so today I have the wonderful honor to introduce two more of our guest contributors, one who you've already met, Sharon Liu from the Office of Educational Technology at the U.S. Department of Ed, and she just gave a wave. And Jonathan Poritz, a dear colleague of mine here in Colorado who just gave a wave, and he's the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning and a recovering mathematics professor. Am I getting that correct, Jonathan, or did I phrase that incorrectly?
I don't know if recovering is the right word. Still
No,
suffering addiction.
That's right. That's right. He is a lifelong professor, that's for sure. Here at Colorado State University in Pueblo. And so Taylor and I identified these two voices as viewpoints we really value in this broader conversation of blockchains in education. And both folks have been engaged with Colorado's action in this space. So it's really a pleasure for us to have them here. And we're really happy that they both agreed to join us in this conversation today. So we've asked these two to help us step through a dialogue on the usefulness or lack thereof of blockchain technology in the world of education, and we'll keep it channeled to education for now because we know this bleeds into other areas and other sectors, but today we're talking a little bit more about education. And throughout this conversation, I will attempt to keep an eye out for any comments coming through the chat. We want it to be engaging for you all too with your ongoing lifelong learning. So get your minds working and feel free to share your perspectives via chat. And with that, you know, we had this one question that we had queued up to kind of get things stoked, to get things fired up. And I'm going to ask Professor Poritz to get us started first. And the question that we had was, what is the applicability or usefulness, if any, of blockchain technology within the context of education or higher education? But Jonathan, you and I have had many extensive conversations and dialogues ourselves on the topic. So I invite you to share any thoughts you have broadly to open up the conversation.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know. I don't really want to come out as against interesting things people are working on. I think there are really fascinating things going on in this group. I think there's some really hard problems. Some of the schemas that people are talking about and the credential recognition of these things are a really hard problem. I mean, they seem to me probably, from the sense of computer science, roughly equivalent to the Turing test. So that's something I want to explore a little later. I think they're really hard, and I applaud you for trying to do that. But in terms of blockchain in this context, so I'm a pure mathematician by training, but I've worked in the IT industry on and off for many years. I was working in the network security and cryptography group and the IBM Zurich Research Laboratory in the early noughts, and I did some work then. Actually, I wrote a couple of papers with some colleagues at IBM that were on sort of what people call these days permission blockchains, although they don't really call them that anymore. Well, I know people still call them that. I think it's a stupid name. It's like saying freeze-dried water. It's a little bit weird. But I wrote a couple of papers that have suddenly gotten much more citations recently because of the excitement about blockchain. So it's something I care very deeply about. I think it's beautiful science. I've taught graduate courses and I think it's wonderful computer science and applied mathematics. I just personally, I don't really see the applications in education really much at all. And I think that, there's the reason is I have a sort of emotional connection with some of this technology and some of the mathematics and computer science. And so every once in a while I hear out of the corner of my eye, I catch an announcement of something going on, application of blockchains in education. And it just gets me really passionate about it for a short time until I can sort of drag myself away. And so I see, so many of the comments that I see in this space are just kind of, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, I'm sure we're all aware that a brand new technology can be overhyped, and that does disservice to the technology and doesn't mean the technology is not useful. But I have heard smart people who work in this space say things like, it's hard to lie on a blockchain. It's not. I've heard people say things like, if you put that data on a blockchain, no one could ever hack it. About, for example, the famous hacks of state government information. That's not true. I've heard people say, I heard someone just the other day saying, if the supply chains for PPE in this crisis we're having now with COVID-19 were on blockchains, we wouldn't be having any trouble with getting PPE to medical responders. These are just nonsense statements, and they detract from what is a beautiful technology. And I think that we as a community, we need to I'm a math teacher. I'm used to talking to rooms full of people who look very confused. And I'm used to making people upset about learning things. My recommendation is, people seem to be very concerned about spending the time to learn some of the details of technology. And let me just give you one example. So it seems like blockchains, put some credentials on the blockchain. That kind of statement sort of makes me really nervous, because where does the blockchain live? Why are people doing the computation that makes the blocks get verified? There's all sorts of technical questions there that a slightly more sophisticated conversation could explore. But let's say you're going to do that, put your credentials on the blockchain. Those data on the blockchain is only useful if it's signed, if it's real data, if it corresponds to something in the world. So every digital credential that comes from a school or that list of recognized institutions should have a digital signature. The credential should have a digital signature from that institution. So whether it's on the blockchain or not. So if you're going to put credentials on a blockchain, they all have to be signed. It doesn't make sense to put, otherwise some random person to distribute a thing, some random person could submit something to a chain and it would get into a valid block. So in order to have any of these blockchain-based solutions work, we have to have digital signatures working across higher ed or even K through 12. So once you've got that working, why do we need a blockchain? I totally do not understand. And by the way, when I say I don't understand, it's a term of art in academia. It means I think I understand and I think it's wrong. But I don't understand how people are saying the right place to put something is on a blockchain. Why don't we just sign it and hand the students a thumb drive with a PDF of their diploma that was signed by the school they graduated from? And Sharon's office can keep track of the digital, the public keys and the private keys and make sure those signatures are real, and we're done, right? And so I don't understand, and this is the kind of thing I don't, so anyway, I'm rambling, but I think there's great technology here and there's beautiful stuff, but the claims that are made about blockchains are just so overblown, they just don't make any damn sense. And we should people who are going to spend a lot of time should spend a little bit of time to learn some of the terminology and the way the technology actually, I realize it's intimidating. I'm intimidated by it too, but let's conquer our fears and have a real conversation about what this stuff actually can do.
Thank you, Jonathan, for your opening thoughts. Well, I know you shared a little bit of that at the kickoff event that we had during January. So some of you may be familiar with some of the themes that Jonathan was bringing up, but Sharon, I would kick it over to you to hear your opening kind of thoughts and reflections on Jonathan's stoking of the fire.
I'm going to disappoint you. I don't have a manifesto. I wish I did. I would have written it. I would have had a drink and written it late last night if I knew this was what was happening. But I guess I would just say the first thing and the most important thing, Jonathan, is that you do not want my office to keep track of anything. Because if you think that you experience like confused looks from people, I just want you to imagine for a minute what it looks like to explain blockchain to a bunch of policymakers who can't get their phones to work properly, aka like my mom, to like have a conversation with them about why they should invest in something like this. So I think that like I think that I don't necessarily disagree with you, right? Because the one example that you gave of like, let's just put a credential on a blockchain, I really feel like that's sort of the wrong statement and the wrong approach that anyone can have to exploring a technology. Just by way of introduction to anyone that may not be familiar with the work that my team does, I work in the Office of Educational Technology at the Department of Education. And our key question that we like to ask our stakeholders is like, what are the big education policy issues that you are struggling with? What are your challenges? And how can the technology that's available to us help us address some of these issues, right? So let's, sorry, I saw the chat, I shouldn't get distracted. So in that context, I think that we are mapping a very similar set of problems in the education space, whether it's like some of the issues that you are facing in Colorado. I think it just translates naturally, right? So we have students who are not, I think, who don't have access to the kind of opportunities that they could have. They are not able to advance socially or economically. They are not able to advance from high school to college to get a job in the workforce. And especially now, I think with the disruption to education and the disruption to like place-based work, there is a lot going on in education right now and a lot going on in workforce right now. And so let's just wave the magic blockchain wand to fix it all, right? And I don't think that's the right approach. And I don't think that's the approach that we would recommend. I also don't even think that we would recommend the approach of let's just put the credentials on a blockchain and that solves the problem. I think very fundamentally what we want to ask, the question that we want to ask is, how can we give every individual a way to communicate their own abilities, their skills, so that they can pursue the opportunities that they need, right? So how can we put so if you put my bachelor's degree in molecular biology on a thumb drive and gave it to me, what could I do with it? And how would that benefit me in the long run? I think in the end, it benefits me as much as my piece of paper that I don't know where it is, right? But if I can have a tool for communicating what I'm able to do and how I can contribute, I think that's powerful. And I think that if you give me a way of saying that in a way that's authentic and authenticated, then I think that I will be able to access different opportunities. So that I think that I would just say that by way of introduction. Like I would not start the question of like, what can we put on a blockchain and does it have to be permissioned or permissionless? I would say like, what are the ways that we can actually empower people? And is like, can we experiment or can we design blockchains in a way that do that?
And I'm going to interject real quick. I don't think anyone else wants to be rude, but Sharon, you sound like you're from the future. I think you might just have two mics. It's coming through perfectly fine. But if you've got two mics up, you might mute one of them.
I don't. I logged out
of my phone. If you don't, then don't worry about it. It's coming through fine. It just, you sound like you might be a robot.
Authoritative voice.
No, it's perfectly fine. Don't
I'm
sweat.
not yelling. I'm sorry. Okay.
Cool. Don't worry about it. Yeah, you're still coming through okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Sharon. And I think these are some of the questions that we're trying to wrap our minds around here in the state of Colorado from the state perspective too. So yeah, Sharon is from the future, says Kim. But I think these are also some of the questions that we've been wrestling with in education for decades, which is fascinating to me, not having worked in higher ed as long as some of my other colleagues. You know, I remember just starting in higher ed and having the exact same questions over the last, you know, decade that still have not been answered. And with all the progress that's been made and all these amazing emerging technologies and things of that nature, you start to get really excited about maybe we could pose some of these solutions to some of the questions that are so long-standing within the system. I'm seeing some chats come through. Jonathan, I don't know if you had any thoughts kind of in response to what Sharon shared, and I'll go ahead and start gathering up some questions in the chat.
Yeah, no, I think, Sharon, I totally agree with your point that if you had control of your transcript from your undergraduate diploma and on a thumb drive, that gives you some power. In fact, that's exactly what I think is the kind of great solution waiting to be done. In fact, I think obviously if you went to a prospective employer and emailed them a copy of this file you have on your thumb drive, they would say, well, I don't know if I should trust that. And so you would say, don't worry, it's been digitally signed by my alma mater. And so they would have to check the digital signature on your diploma, which would prove that it was indeed issued by your alma mater and that it had not been altered by you before you sent it to them. That's like 1980s technology, digital signatures. And the only thing that we need to make this really work, this is where I perhaps mistakenly said your office could handle this, but we need what's called in the acronym in the cryptography world is a PKI, a public key infrastructure, a way of associating the keys that are used to sign and verify signatures on official documents and make sure those correspond to real people. So whatever your alma mater is, it has to have it has to have a key pair that is really secure. And building those has been an ongoing problem in computer science for 20 years. And I think if we had such a thing, you know, we're going to need such a thing for all the fancy solutions I hear you guys talking about in this Ed 3.0 network. We're going to need a working PKI. So why don't we build it right now? Maybe your office doesn't want any responsibility. I agree, PKIs don't really have to have a central control, but we need a working PKI. When we have a working PKI, then Sharon, you can take your transcript and just have a digitally signed copy of it and mail it. And that the Medium piece you wrote about how hard it was for you to get a job because you had to mail credentials, you had to wait for your alma mater and different places you had diplomas from to send the form on. I've applied for jobs recently. I've done this too with my undergrad and graduate institutions. And they, you know, why do we have to wait for 2 weeks and pay them money by a physical check and all that to get them to mail a copy of a transcript? I could just have the transcript on my thumb drive. I'm saying that's a great solution that also is good in the COVID world because there's no contact. I just email people my signed document. And there's a solution which doesn't require any blockchains and solves the imminent problem that you described in the Medium article, to solve some issues associated with contact because no one has to go into any offices to do all of this. And I don't understand why we haven't, as a community, haven't said, you know, the kind of the difficult junctures in the supply chain and of employed people and people with credentials. The first step we could do right now, we could, you know, I could get a grad student to write the code to do this, you know, in a week. I mean, this is well-known stuff, and we just need a working PKI, which is not easy.
But Jonathan,
yeah,
I mean, is that actually what you want, though, right? Like, so, like, what you're suggesting is that there is a central authority that everyone trusts, and like, I guess I would really call that into question. Like, why would you trust another authority to manage an identity? And I guess I would also ask a first principles question around central authorities, which, and you know, this isn't me like waving any sort of flag or anything like that, but you know, centralized authorities often systematically exclude huge populations of individuals that are typically the traditionally disadvantaged individuals, right? So we have this system where, and by the way, my point about the thumb drive was that I actually feel like that's a pretty useless solution because it doesn't do anything that a paper diploma doesn't do currently, right? And it's really just like an access question, right? So there are a lot of hoops that you and I jump through when we apply for jobs. And that's fine because, like, you know, I can jump through the hoops, right? Or I can figure it out. I can call the help desk. I can do all of these things. I think there are huge populations for whom this is not possible. And that's the problem, right? And so, you know, there are two sort of first principles issues related to that. So number one, like, we're walking down this blockchain road. So now it seems like I've like jumped the fence to the other side, but like, like digital wallets and digital identities only really matter if people are digitally literate. According to PIAC and all of the other surveys, the United States has 30 million digitally illiterate adults, right? And these are the ones that we want to provide opportunity for. So if we're creating a digital wallet solution for these adults that are digitally illiterate, then I think that we have done nothing, right? So the question is, like, is there something about the technology that's different than a database technology, like that's different than how it manages identity from like a PKI perspective, that allows an individual really to own and represent all of this information themselves, right? And is like a translator for the labor or that they would put into like earning a skill into this opportunity that the skill brings. And I don't know the answer to that question, but I definitely think it's worth investigating, right? So, a lot of times it's not about like digital signature. I mean, it could be about digital signatures or large databases or, like tables that convert. But I think ultimately, like, I guess I think about students. Okay, so this is an example. I think about students who are in K-12 that are the children of migrant workers, right? So migrant workers move seasonally from state to state because of lettuces and cabbages and grapes and apples and all of those things that we eat. Their families are often not digitally literate or speak English very well. They have to transfer from school to school to school to school, right? And what we're saying is, like, how do we move the records with individuals? There is a central database that states can voluntarily contribute to, right? But the amount of time that a fourth grader moves, like when they say, like, hi, I'm new here, let me pick up in the middle of your fourth grade class. I'm going to demonstrate to you that I'm a fourth grader because of this, and that I should be in fourth grade, but that I need these special like affordances, right? Including maybe like I have an IEP or things like that. How does the new school district know that about the old one, right? Like this idea that an individual can own all of the components of their identity and have that move with them and that they control it. I think could be like very impactful. I don't know that putting it on a thumb drive or printing out pieces of paper or making people go through all of the bureaucratic things is like a sustainable solution. I mean, I think that, yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, I don't know the answer to these questions. Honestly, I don't know why I'm invited to this panel, but I just feel like if we feel like that, so if we look at distributed ledger technologies and think like what makes them unique amongst all the technologies that are available, like why would you leverage this particular tool versus any of the other ones in the toolbox? Like one of the things that really strikes me is like we have an opportunity to think about an individual's identity differently than we have before. And I don't think we've figured it out, obviously. I think this is definitely an ongoing conversation. But if there is a way for me to look at you and you to look at me, and we can decide what we want, how we want to represent ourselves, and that you can know this is like an authentic representation, I think that could go a long way. I think I'm getting a little esoterical, but like, from a records exchange perspective, from like an efficiency of transfer of systems, I mean, I don't know the answer, but I think this is definitely worth looking at.
So I'm going to jump in the interest of time and say two things. One, Taylor, we did not allot enough time for this conversation, but I think that is the exact kind of conversation we wanted to queue up, was kind of continued strengthened approach of diverse opinions on this topic in order to inform any work that we're moving forward with. So I would invite each speaker to kind of close out with any thoughts. Jonathan, we'll start with you. 30 to 60 seconds on any kind of final thoughts or invitations for engaging in further conversation with folks. Then when you're finished, we'll turn it over to Sharon, and thank you all.
So I think Sharon made some really excellent points. I think these are really vital things, and I totally agree with you about the issue of people who have maybe come from diverse backgrounds. We want to support them. That is my highest priority as an educator. I work with many of those students on my campus. I think we have to. I totally agree with you, but I think that there's somehow the word blockchain somehow is used in modern parlance, sort of like the cloud. It's like it doesn't exist anywhere. It's somewhere up there, and the example you gave of a fourth grader moving from class to class, it's not like there's no data, it's in some perfect parallel universe that they can pull the data down. A distributed ledger is not a perfect, well, someone has to do the computation to copy that and verify that and make sure it's real. So there are people keeping track of that data, even if we don't want them to be a centralized, trusted third party, someone's keeping track of it. So I guess I think that I totally agree with what you said at the very beginning, that we have interesting new affordances with new technology, and we have the way to go after them is to approach the problems that we care about. Many of the ones that you mentioned, I totally agree with you on, and I think that we should not go after them with a solution in mind. It's like, I've seen many initiatives that say, Sharon, out of your office, I've seen some initiatives where the title is blockchain, how we can use blockchain technology to approach solution X, and problem X. And it seems to me we can use problem X deserves an enormous amount of attention. You totally correctly identified those, and I'm totally in agreement with you, but we need to be wider. And I think blockchain is just not the solution that people think it is in many contexts. It's somehow we've bought some snake oil about what it does. I think the problems are great, and we need to not bite off more than we can chew, and use technologies more widely. I was looking for good metaphors. I think that to say that we have a blockchain solution to some set of problems, the blockchain initiative would be like saying we have a Helvetica initiative in the federal government, that we're all going to, the font Helvetica is going to help us solve problems. I mean, it's not a bad font, but it's kind of irrelevant to most of the issues that maybe come up that are ones we care about. Anyway, thank you.
I don't disagree with you, so I guess that would be what I say. I don't know if blockchain, I don't know, like, I think that, like, our office has always been careful to not claim that any technology solves any problems. Actually, people use technology to solve problems, and I think that for our team, at least, we have a very long list of what we consider like really important education problems. And so I think that one of the things that you'll read when we release our blockchain, our first education blockchains initiative report, is a number of hypotheses on how a distributed technology can support a community of stakeholders to address some key issues, some of those issues on our to-do list, as it were. And I think that part of why part of how we would like to approach it as well is to ask some questions about how would we know if we've solved a problem, or like what could a solution look like. And that makes it technology agnostic as well, right? Because if what we're saying is, as our North Star, is that there should be, like, individuals should be mobile, right? That could be physically, social, that could be economic. And once we have in mind what that solution set looks like, then we can apply different tools or like different research questions, and blockchain could be one of the research questions. Like, does this identity management system enable this actual outcome that we want to see? So we don't want to see an outcome that blockchain has solved X or blockchain has solved Y. What we want to see is mobility and like individual empowerment. And once we have described that solution set, then we can start examining what helps us get there the best. So that is what I will leave it with.
That's the perfect way to wrap this up. And yeah, as Spencer said, he had to run our typical game of Zoom hopping. I think he had something he had to jump to, so he said thank you, but had to run. And yeah, I mean, this is as much an introduction to the conversation as it is. We're certainly not going to land on any singular solution in an hour's time. And you know, in the near term, I think our hope with this initiative, along with you know, many others in the state and also nationally, is to step one, yes, educate. I think that's which, Jonathan, I think you're right. I mean, you know, if there's not an understanding of some of the technology and the way it's evolving, it introduces an entirely new set of problems that are more counterproductive, you know, in the long run, if we don't at least bring that along for the ride. So I think education, yes, but I think also you know, an openness to explore. I think, at least from my perspective, we can't underestimate the power of new technology in the moment. And right now, there are clear problems. You know, whether it's just sort of broadly skills gaps or equity gaps, anything else, along with just more granular issues, you know, in local contexts, which, you know, Colorado is working on sort of the attainment issue here locally. So I think it's a both and, right? It's you know, our hope is that with C-Lab we can provide the right ecosystem to both learn and build community and capacity, along with, you know, testing and doing some R&D and putting some real things on, again, in a safe and responsive way, on the ground to understand like what does this represent. And PKIs, like things like that, step one, like I'm ready. Can we get a public key infrastructure that allows identity and credentialing to sort of take this next step? Yes, like let's do that right now. But yeah, so thank you both. We're right up against time. We'll stay on for another 5 or 10 if folks have, or I'll say at least Colin and a few of us will. If you guys have to jump, feel free. But we definitely want to leave the floor open for there's some great conversation going on in the chat. So if you have to jump, go ahead. But we'll stay on for a few and have an open conversation if anyone else wants to hop in. So thank you again for another C-Lab Pulse, and again, we'll do it again next month. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Jonathan.